All right, we will begin. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Alexis Collins, and I work on the branded team here at Synopta. I've had the pleasure of partnering with Sonya Looney through our work on Westlife brand, so I'm especially excited to welcome her today. As a fun bonus, Sonya has a new post that went live on Instagram today in collaboration with Westlife. After the session, feel free to check it out on Sonya's or Westlife Instagram page. This event is brought to you by Westlife and the Synopta's Women's Network in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, and we couldn't think of a better person to bring in for this conversation. Sonya Looney is a world champion, professional mountain biker, mental performance and executive coach, keynote speaker, and podcast host, specializing in sustainable high performance and well-being. With a master's in applied positive psychology from the University of Pennsylvania and a background in neuroscience and engineering, Sonya helps high achievers and organizations cultivate resilience, purpose-driven motivation, and foster a healthy relationship with success. Through both her research and lived experience, she teaches what it means to strive wisely, balancing ambition with meaning. And when she's not speaking, coaching, or riding bikes in the mountains, she's negotiating snack deals and bedtime routines with her two young kids, which she'll tell you might be her toughest endurance event yet. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Sonya Looney.
Thanks, Alexis. That was a great intro. And welcome, everybody. If you would like to turn your camera on, no pressure, but I'd love to see your faces because then I can see if you're listening. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it. So that means I get to skip the slide that I don't like, but has to be there. All the different things that I do. I spin lots of different plates. And really, I'm mostly just concerned with everything that falls under the umbrella of high performance and well-being. And I got to this point.
I was really nervous going into this race because just 6 months before I had failed at something that was totally devastating to me.
14,000 feet now. It's the hardest one.
Yeah, I'm cracked. And now I was attempting something that no one had ever done before, and I was afraid that I was going to fail again, but it didn't matter. I had to go do this race. Going to these races, they're so challenging and so far away from home and so far out of my comfort zone that you have to figure out who you are and what your expectations are and how are you going to react to things that are happening to you. I'm walking down the backside of this mountain pass and my brakes had failed completely, and there was still another day of racing after that. So I thought that this is it, I'm going to fail, and I had to define what success meant to me. And success to me was I was able to overcome things along the way, along the journey to getting to the finish line. And even though it wasn't going to turn out the way that I had planned,
I'm at 103 miles and 20,000 feet of climbing. I'm tired and starting to see funny things.
I was already a success because I had done so much more than I ever thought I could.
So I'm a mountain biker, as you can see, and that race that was that video was about was a 10-day mountain bike stage race in Nepal across the Annapurna circuit in the Himalayas, the highest mountain bike race in the world, and no woman had ever completed it before. So I wanted to attempt to be the first one to ever do it. Spoiler alert is that I was able to finish the race, and you can watch my TED Talk if you want to learn more about that. But whenever I do these talks about performance lessons from racing in 25 plus countries around the world, it always comes down to not only the physical parts, but how do you have a strong mind? And this is the question that everybody asks me. Why do you do this? How do you do this? And for the sake of our talk today, I wish I could tell you about every single way that I do it, but I picked a couple of core elements that I think might help you in the workplace, because performance is performance. It doesn't matter if it's on a top of a mountain in Nepal or in your house, in your home office, all of the same skills apply. And also just a shout out to Synopta. I've been plant-based since 2013. I was in a New York Times best-selling book called The Plant-Based Athlete. So I really appreciate having all these great plant-based options because it wasn't the case whenever I first changed my diet, and that's a whole other story. I like to say the most powerful voice is the one inside your own head. This is a picture of me in Spain. And this race was really funny because it was most of my races are 5 to 10 days long. And this was a 7-day race in sunny Spain in February, where everybody traveled from all over the world to come to this race because they wanted to experience what southern Spain has to offer in the Andalusia region. And you can see that it wasn't very sunny. And a lot of people ended up defeating themselves and having a bad experience because of the stories that they were telling themselves about the way that things should have been. And I think that we can all relate to this. We all have expectations of how we think things should be, and the things that we start telling ourselves start creating emotions and puts us into a spiral. So how do you think about your own self-talk? How do you train your self-talk? The great thing is that self-talk is a trainable skill. And I haven't always had positive and credible self-talk. I used to be very hard on myself in my races, saying all these terrible things that you would never say to another human being. And that didn't help me perform better. And a lot of times we think that being very critical of ourselves or berating ourselves is going to help us perform better. In the short term, that could work, but research shows that in the long term, that isn't the case. And while we are talking about performance, we also want to feel happy and satisfied in our lives. So whenever we're beating ourselves up all the time, that's not actually going to help us. So how do you train your self-talk? How do you become better at it? The first thing is becoming aware. A lot of times our minds start running wild and we don't realize what we're telling ourselves until we've gone down a rabbit hole. So noticing right away what you're saying to yourself. It might even start with how you're feeling in your body, and noticing that when you get stuck in what we call in psychology these thinking traps of I'm not good enough, I'm not going to be able to do it, everybody has it easier than me. There's a bunch of different thinking traps, so you can Google that if you're interested. And then you can try to figure out, when do I actually get in these scenarios? You'll find that there are contexts where maybe you do have self-talk that becomes more negative or a little bit more anxious. And then asking the bigger picture of how does it actually impact the work that I'm doing or how I'm showing up. So what do you say to yourself? So just taking a second for yourself, and we'll have a little reflection exercise in a few minutes about where this might pop up. But here are some things that I say to myself whenever I'm struggling or whenever I am unsure. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. I'll waste time or I'll waste money. I'll look stupid. Others do it better than me, so why try? And we tend to personalize things that go poorly. So instead of making failure or a mistake a temporary thing, we make it about us and as a judgment about ourselves as a person. So these things don't really help us whenever we are trying to navigate challenges. And as humans, we're here to thrive and to pursue our potential. And that's such a huge part of what makes our lives meaningful. If you think back into your life of what are the most meaningful experiences I've had, they're probably not the things that came easily to you. They're probably the things that you had to work for a little bit, the things where maybe you struggled a little bit, where in the moment it did not feel good. But afterwards, whenever you said, what is meaningful here? It probably had to do with other people, and it probably had to do with something where you had to push yourself a little bit. So recognizing the story whenever you are navigating something, if you're an athlete, if you're a marathon runner, whatever the case may be, or if you're at work and maybe somebody says something that ticks you off, or somebody asks you to do something that you don't want to do, or maybe you're worried that you're not going to be able to do it. Trying to start putting data points down to help you change the way that you speak to yourself can help. And there's two types of self-talk in sport. We talk about motivational self-talk. So motivational self-talk is saying, you can do this. So if I'm out on the trail and I see a really steep rock that I have to ride up, I could tell myself, there's no way I'm going to be able to make it. I should just give up. I should just get off my bike and walk it. Or I could tell myself, you've done hard things like this before. You've been training. You can do that. Go give it a try. So that's motivational self-talk. And then there's instructional self-talk. So that is telling yourself what needs to happen in order to execute it. So if I go back to the trail that I'm riding, if I see a corner that I want to get around, instead of focusing on how hard the corner is, or, you know, all the times I didn't do it well, or put pressure on myself, I tell myself, okay, what do I need to do to get through this corner? I need to look to the exit of the corner. I need to create bike body separation. So whatever the instructions you need to give yourself in the moment, This gives you real-time resilience so that you're not stuck in these thinking traps, worrying about how it's going to be. And it helps you, number one, motivate, and number two, give you the instructions that you need to do in order to get through the thing. And then most importantly is remembering and reflecting upon the thing that you just did. Maybe you need to reflect later if you're still in the moment, like in a race or at work in a meeting, but reflecting on the thing that you did and remembering that so that you can build these data points so that your self-talk can be credible. Because whenever we think about like optimism or positive psychology, a lot of times people think about toxic positivity, where it's always about good vibes and feeling good. And that's not what positive psychology is. It's about being credible. How do you learn how to look at all the things that you're doing in order to grow what's good in your life instead of only fixate on the bad? So this is the story I was talking about in that video. No woman had ever finished going over 18,000 feet in a 10-day race across Nepal. And how did I even go to this thing? Like, I'd never tried something like this before. I was pretty new to endurance mountain biking. And I was really inspired by what could happen, the possibility instead of the worry about failure. And you could see in that video that I was crying in that video, which is really vulnerable to put out there. But that's what it looks like sometimes when you're doing hard things. And I didn't give up. I just kept pressing on to see what would happen. And I thought that it was over, but someone else had to, they got altitude sickness and they ended up having to ride a yak over the pass. And then their brakes still worked because my brakes had failed. And I was able to borrow their brakes and finish the race. So whenever I look back on a hard experience like this, I see that I was resilient. I noticed what type of things I was telling myself, and I generated perspective by reflecting on all those things. And by doing that, that empowered me and it inspired me to want to take on other hard races. That was the catalyst that allowed me to travel around the world and do the hardest mountain bike races in the world in places like Mongolia or Haiti or Sri Lanka or Brazil or Morocco in the Sahara Desert. And I wasn't born this way. I wasn't born telling myself that things are going to go well and that I'm going to be able to do it. This is something that I had to train through the hardest races. And now it is so helpful in my life as I build my career, in my coaching career, as a parent, or even as a speaker right now. Like, there are thoughts, ticker tape thoughts running in the back of my head right now that I could choose to listen to or not. Are people paying attention? Is this boring? Am I making any sense? Those thoughts are in the back of my head, and I can use my perspective and curiosity and positive self-talk to tell myself, like, you've given lots of talks before. You like telling stories. So that's an example in real time of something that's going on in the back of my mind. So what are some tools that we can use? If you are interested in self-talk, there's a great book called Chatter by Ethan Kross, where he talks about all the things in our head and some practical tools to get better at them. And he also has a new book that came out on emotion regulation as well. But these are some of the tools that I use, and they're research backed. So number one, avoid catastrophizing, thinking of the worst possible case thing that could happen. I do this all the time. I'm just wired that way. So zooming out as far as you can. How am I going to feel in the future? How have things happened like this in the past, so that you get out of the super intensity of the present moment. Remembering past successes, asking yourself, when was a time that this actually went well for me? And what strengths can I attribute to that? Using you or your name. So if you use I, the hard thing that you're doing becomes too close to you. So you can do this. Sonya, you're able to get this talk done in 35 minutes. And what would you say to a friend? And that also creates more distance to normalize your experience that everybody has hard times. Everybody can struggle. Everybody can have imposter syndrome or feel unsure of themselves. This isn't just you, and then it's okay. And the last one is diffusion. And I know this is like drinking out of a fire hose, you guys. So hopefully you'll be able to check this recording out later if it's like, whoa, this is a lot. Diffusion is, I'm having the thought that this is hard. I'm having the thought that I might not be able to do it. I'm having the thought that so-and-so is judging me and doesn't like this. It helps you realize that some of the things that you tell yourself may not be reality. You've probably heard the quote, don't believe everything you think. So this just helps generate perspective so that you can have more credible self-talk. So I'm going to give you guys about 30 seconds now. And I encourage you to do this because the reflection piece is what translates into real life skills. Think of a time when your inner voice was harsh or critical. It might have been this morning as you were getting ready for work. It might have been right before you jumped on this call. Thinking of what it said to you and writing it down. That's your inner critic. that inner critic is actually trying to help keep you safe. We don't want to banish the inner critic, but just saying, I see you there, inner critic. I see that you're trying to keep me safe and help me out. And then in another column, writing down, what are other things that are true here? How can I zoom out using some of these skills? How can I generate perspective so that maybe this thought that I'm having might not be true? And what is something useful and productive that I can tell myself that isn't just cheerleading, but something that is based on past experiences or things that I've done to help me overcome this? And this might seem really, really simple, but this is something you can do all day long. Catch yourself in the thought and acknowledge it, and acknowledge what, when, or why that might be there. And then what might you say to yourself moving forward? And you can practice this everywhere. Honestly, I probably use self-talk more in my parenting now because my kids are 3 and 5, because there's lots of challenging moments. Okay, we're going to move on to the next is motivation. And we've all thought, oh, I just wish I could be more motivated. Or maybe I'm overly motivated, which is what happens with me. And here's that picture again from another picture from that race in Spain that was very sunny and warm. That actually wasn't. A lot of times we can get stuck in these motivational traps. Maybe we started doing something because we loved it, but then there starts to become pressures, external pressures that come whenever there could be rewards or whenever we feel like we need to be doing something a certain way. An example would be, I started riding my bike 20 plus years ago, yes, because I loved it. It was fun. It was an adventure. And then as I started getting better at it, people started giving me commentary like, wow, you're so good at this, or I started winning races. And then the thing that I love became a pressure. And then I started getting paid for that thing. So now there's even more pressure attached to this. What if I don't do well? What if, what are other people gonna think about me? Everything becomes on the line. And then you think that the primary goal of, I wanna be a pro mountain biker, I wanna get paid to ride my bike, you're gonna feel a certain way, but you forget that there's all these pressures that come with it that can take you away from your why. And what we want to be able to do is simultaneously perform and acknowledge those pressures are there, but also stay grounded in the reason why we're doing it in the first place, so that we can stay balanced and satisfied as we are striving towards our goals, while recognizing that there are performance outcomes that we need to have. So this is from, if you guys want to nerd out, this is called Self-Determination Theory by Ed Deci and Richard Bryan, and I've adapted it here for the workplace. But whenever we're far on this left side of the screen, we are really being pressured by extrinsically motivated things. And this happens as we start getting external rewards and external validation for the things, or even feedback. So all of us have to work for a paycheck. All of us have to meet deadlines, but the pressure that comes from it, that could make you perform worse. So how do we start moving ourselves towards this more intrinsically motivated place where you can find a way to enjoy the thing that you're doing, or finding more alignment with your goals while holding the space for these extrinsic pressures that are coming, which happen in most of the things that we do? So I'll give you guys a second to look at this. I'd feel guilty if I didn't do the thing. I must prove to myself. And sometimes our self-worth becomes so tied up in these things that we have to do. My self-worth has gotten tied up in how well I'm performing as an athlete. And that can be very stressful, to be on a start line with your self-worth on the line, or to show up at a meeting with your self-worth on the line. And instead of doing something motivated by growth and your values, you start doing it because of deprivation, trying to plug a hole in a sinking boat instead of opening up your sail and seeing how far you can go. This is the challenge with any high performer, and so much of my research is in this area. So what are some things that we can do to move right on that spectrum towards values and growth? Number one, it's being able to identify what your values are. A lot of times we haven't actually sat down and done a values exercise, and maybe you guys have. If values feels too like woo-woo or whatever, I recommend going to via character strengths. Just go Google that. That's called Values in Action. It is the only science-backed kind of personality assessment that you can take that's based on your strengths and values, and it will tell you what your top strengths are. Your strengths are traits that are values that you can use in action. So if you can identify what your top strengths are, you can see how you're using them. You can see how other people are using their strengths and spot their strengths. And then you can tie that to your motivation so that you know whenever you're doing something that you're actually exercising that value, even if it's a task that you don't really like. And thinking about how it serves a bigger picture. So a story I'll share with this connecting to values piece was there's a story from some research about this guy who was working at NASA and he was a janitor, and someone went and interviewed him about being a janitor. And most people think like, well, no one's going to like that. But the guy said, we're putting a man on the moon. So he realized that what he was doing was contributing to something bigger than being a janitor. He was helping put a man on the moon. So whenever you can think about the bigger picture of your work, even if it's a task that you don't like, that can actually really help you connect more to being more intrinsically motivated. Number two is focusing on the growth. What are you learning here? That requires being curious, because if you're not curious, you're probably not thinking about what you're learning. Building competence. We all want to feel like we're competent, like we're growing, that we have some sense of control over our lives. So if you can break tasks down and think about some of these things, especially tasks that you might be struggling with, that can help you over time. And you can use your self-talk that we just talked about a few minutes ago in order to help support this as you move forward. And lastly, our relationships. Relationships are the most important thing for our well-being. Other people matter. There's a Harvard study of adult development with across a lifespan. And the most important thing that came out was the power of our relationships. So thinking about that in the context of maybe tasks that you are feeling more pressure around. So here is a way to practice this. So take a moment to reflect or to write, or even the chat is open, you guys. If you're comfortable writing things in the chat or have any questions as I'm going through, feel free to pop it in the chat. Maybe you have something that isn't making sense to you that I'm saying, feel free to pop it in the chat, and I'm keeping an eye on it. So start with this, thinking of a task that you dread or that you feel pressure around. And what can you use here from this list in order to support yourself or support your team culture? So I'll just be quiet for a moment so you can think about it and maybe write it down. If anyone wants to pop in the chat, something I've said so far that they have never thought about before. No, you don't have to if you don't want to, but if something pops in your mind of like, hey, this is really resonating, or I'm thinking about this, maybe that will help other people too. I'm also giving a moment because I know I covered a lot of stuff to see if there's any questions or to just let yourself digest. So I'll give a quick recap of what we've covered. We started with self-talk and talking about the difference between, yes, love it. Don't believe everything you think, Adam says. Yeah, self-talk, not learning that our negative self-talk isn't true. The thoughts that we have about something that pops up isn't necessarily true. And how can we use our past experiences and perspective in order to increase our positive self-talk, and how doing that more will help you over time. It's not a band-aid, but it will help you over time, and how we need to listen to the inner critic and recognize it and say, this is here for a reason. And then how are we going to be productive and move forward? The next thing that we covered were motivation traps of talking. I'll show you this motivation continuum again. Talking about how whenever we start getting external rewards for things that we were doing, that can create pressures, and that it takes some perspective and some thought to move back towards the right to why we're doing it in the first place. And that even things that we're doing, like I don't like doing spreadsheets, I don't like doing things like that, but thinking about how these align to the bigger picture and how I can use my strengths and values, that can be really helpful. Using past experiences to build confidence. Thanks, Erin. So this is called self-efficacy. This is how we build confidence. And there's 3 different ways that we can do that. So it's based on, number 1, remembering our past experiences. Number 2, looking around you at other people who you see have a similar skill set to you, and watching them succeed at something helps you believe that you can succeed too. And the third is verbal persuasion. So somebody telling you that they believe in you, that the power of that can help you increase your sense of confidence. And if I pull that into the mountain biking world, which is where I've come from, whenever I see somebody ride a downhill that I think I can't do, or I'm afraid I can't do, but I know that we're relatively similar, it makes me believe that I can do it too, and I'll try it. Or if I see a downhill that looks scary, but I know I've ridden it 10 times before, it helps me believe that I'm able to do that. Or if I've done something similar, or if somebody who I know, like a coach or somebody, tells me that they believe that I can do it and they believe in me, then it makes me go for it. And that's happened in my career so many times. I've needed a lot of that as I have transitioned from not being a full-time professional racer, which I still race, but not at the same amount that I used to do, into these other roles. So remembering these things as you move through, like right now, this is probably a lot of information, but I encourage you to just start noticing how these are coming up for you through your workday and through the work week. So that last foundation I will talk about today is our vitality. Vitality is essentially health and wellness. It's not just about our physical health, though. And I think this is what gets missed a lot whenever we're thinking about vitality. It's our emotional and mental states. And as an athlete, this is something that we don't often think about. We think like, oh, I need to train as much as I can. I need to physically perform. And we are not robots, at least most of us are not robots. So whenever we are doing things in our lives, even if you're an athlete, okay, great, thinking traps. Oh my gosh, I have an entire talk on thinking traps. So good. At the end here, we'll have time or where maybe I can dive in a little bit and tell you guys more about that. So vitality, like this is something I had to learn. And you would think, oh, professional athlete has all the vitality in the world. But really what happens, you get stuck in that motivation trap of I have to train more, I have to train more, I have to train more, and you're exhausted. And whenever you are working harder, you are not getting the results that you want. You're just getting more tired and you're getting worse. And this happens at work too. Our brain fatigues. There's something called mental fatigue, and it's very fascinating actually. Mental fatigue impacts physical performance. So for those of you who are working, have a family, whatever, and also trying to be an athlete of some kind, or even just working out in the gym, if you are physically and if you're emotionally and mentally tired, that's going to impact how you feel physically. So how do we take care of ourselves so that we can show up with vitality? I think a lot of times we hear things like, I'll be happy when I get to somewhere. And we think that we're trying to feel happy and fulfilled and satisfied. But I think what we're really trying to feel is vital in our lives. And we're also trying to feel like we matter, that we are adding value and feeling valued. We're feeling seen and heard in our lives. I think that is ultimately what we are trying to do. So how do you do that? Because a lot of times we think about time management. And this is a quote from a sports psychologist I worked with like 10 years ago. And it really was a game changer for me because I've always been very conscientious. My calendar is packed, managing my time. But I didn't think about how that was impacting my energy when I did not leave time for rest or time for things that recharge me. And I've even asked the question, like, what the heck is rest? Because I don't want to just sit there and do nothing. And rest can be something that is restorative. That doesn't mean you just have to sit there and do nothing. It's thinking about all the different tanks that you have and how can you do those things so that you can recharge the other. So how do you manage your energy? And this is something I think about a lot, and I have been very guilty of this. What is the first thing to go when you get busy? Okay, yes, thanks, Claudine. I'll be answering that in just a moment. So the first thing to go when I get busy because my business also includes training, so it's not movement, but it's spending time with friends, it's spending time with family. Like I've worked hard to not do this anymore, but in the past, and as an athlete, actually, you have to almost be completely imbalanced where you have to skip going to things because you have to prioritize either training on your bike or recovering at home. And you don't get to go out with your friends. You don't get to do the things that everybody else gets to do because it's a 24/7 job. So at work, when we get busy at work, we stop doing a lot of these things, or not everybody does, but it becomes really easy to start having this imbalance in our striving, where it only becomes about working towards it. And I do this all the time. Like whenever I love giving talks, I love writing, I love all my work, and I don't want to get out of my chair and go outside and ride my bike or spend time with my friends. I want to stay up and do just one more thing before I go to bed. I don't want to spend time cooking because I want to have something quick to eat so I don't have to waste my time so I can spend more time working. Like we've all been stuck here. So how do you prioritize these things? And I have a training actually that I did at Vanderbilt. I'm a national board certified health and wellness coach. So like how do you help people change their behavior so that they can prioritize things for their vitality? And habit changes is huge. So here are some differences between time management and energy management. And a lot of times in the workplace, a lot of us are focused on time management, how much I'm getting done. If you think about other professions like billable hours in law, athletes, how many hours am I training, so that you can, and this is moving down that motivation continuum back to the external motivation of focusing too much on outputs and not on the quality and the energy behind it. So whenever we think about energy management, it's honoring the fact that we need rest. For me, someone asked me, I think it was Claudine, asked me, what do I do to rest and recharge? That doesn't mean sitting around. I rest and recharge by doing things with my friends. I do things by getting up from my computer and going outside, or even looking at green space. That's a way that helps me recharge. I listen to calming music, or if I need to be energized, I listen to energizing music. Like back to, I love Ethan Kross's work. I've mentioned him a couple times. His book about emotion regulation gives you some of these tips actually on using music as a way to regulate yourself, to calm yourself when you need it, or to energize when you need it. I will switch to reading something that has nothing to do with my work, or it could just be a mental shift, because all the things that I love doing turn into my work, which could be problematic. But riding my bike is a way to recharge from work. It's a way to recharge from everything in my life. And I actually like to ride my bike alone, because that's my alone time to integrate all the different things. Prioritizing sleep is a way that I recharge. And sometimes it's hard because I have little kids that wake up at whatever time they feel like, and they need help. So what is the anchor habit there? The anchor habit is I have to go to bed at a certain time because I can't control anything else that's going to happen. How do I prioritize myself as the whole person? That means saying no to certain things, or recognizing that I call it intentional imbalance. There are going to be periods where I'm going to be very busy with my work tasks that I'm not going to be able to give as much attention to family or friends or my health or what have you. But knowing that when that is over, and that I set a set period of time, that now I'm going to shift my focus to other things that are restorative. So those are some things that I do. I wanted to come up with a few different tips that you guys could take away, because I want these talks to not just be stories about me or stuff from the research, but things that are applicable in real life that I've seen in the research and with my clients that I work with. So figuring out when you have your best energy to show up for the certain things that you might be doing. So like for me, I like doing work tasks in the morning, and I like training midday. I know not everybody has the flexibility to train whenever they feel like it. But doing that can be something that helps you to try to organize your schedule. This micro breaks every 90 minutes. It might not be 90 minutes that you take a break. I have a client where she has in her schedule, every 45 minutes, she takes 5 minutes to take a break. So whatever you need to do, and whatever that break might be. Like some people have a very hard time sitting still. So maybe you get up and walk around. Or here's another tip. If you're somebody that has a hard time sitting at your desk, exercising before work increases cognitive function. I don't want to geek out too much about the neurotransmitter, but there's research that shows that exercise increases activation in your prefrontal cortex that helps you be more creative. So if that's something that is interesting to you, think about that. You can batch similar tasks together, because whenever you start switching tasks back and forth, you become less efficient. Yes, great. Thank you so much. I don't want to mispronounce your name, Naren. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, but that is awesome. Sticking to a routine is very helpful. Protecting one anchor habit. So you saw this here. It's impossible to do all of these well all the time. So picking one or even two that are most important to you. For me, I've really leaned into this relationships piece. I'm really spending time building out my friendships, because I find that having that social support helps me so much. And also, as a side note, thinking about the social support that you have increases your resilience to stress and increases your self-confidence. So that's a +1 for spending time on relationships. So picking something. And also, a lot of us can get stuck in these all or none thinking traps, more thinking traps. That is one. About, if I go for a walk, it has to be for 30 minutes. If I journal, I have to write a whole page. If I work out, it has to be for however amount of time. We come up with all these rules about how things have to be, and then we just don't do it at all because it has to be a certain way. So what can you do to make it the smallest amount? You can see here, I have small actions compound over time. How can you make it the smallest thing so that you do it? Because that helps you build the habit. And it helps you prove to yourself that you are the type of person who wants to do that. And also being able to say no. Like so many of us, like people pleasing is another thinking trap. I have to say yes to everything. How can you learn how to say no? How can you say no in a way that is affirming and recognizes another person? And how can you ask yourself, what am I trading? Because if you say yes to everything, you're saying no to something else. So what am I saying yes to? What am I saying no to? So here's a quick review, and then we'll dive into some of the questions with the time we have left. We talked about self-talk being a trainable skill to improve performance and well-being. And some people think that being critical helps you with performance, but it only helps for a short period of time. And it definitely doesn't help your well-being. How do you motivate in a way that aligns with what matters to you? And how do you think about tasks that you might not even like in a way that can support a bigger purpose? And how do you protect your energy? How do you do that whenever you're so busy and you feel the pressure to do everything and to do everything well? So I'll leave this up here right now for a few minutes if you guys want to connect with me later, but I'm going to jump into the chat now. And let's see. So Claudine, did I answer how do I rest and recharge enough, or do you want to talk more about that before I talk about thinking traps? Okay, great. Does anybody else want to put in the chat what they do? Because everybody is different in how they like to rest and recharge. Watching Netflix is a way to rest and recharge. That's something else that I do. And people tend to villainize watching TV, but I love watching TV. There's something called psychological richness, which helps you build a deeper inner life so that you can have a greater perspective. And watching movies is actually a way to do that. That helps increase your interest and curiosity. So don't beat yourself up if you like watching Netflix. What are some things that people do to rest and recharge? I'll leave it for a second. Yes, Lego, puzzles, books, TikTok, cooking. Lego is amazing. Like my son likes Lego, and I've been so impressed. I just think about the engineers that make the Lego and just wow. Yard work, baking. Yeah, then you get to eat the food after, which now I'm hungry. Also, you guys, that I have developed a plant habit where I have many house plants. And while some people are like, oh gosh, that's a lot of work, like that's a way that helps me rest and recharge because I get to care for the plants and see how beautiful they are. Walking the dog, these are great. I love to tend to wild black bears that visit me every summer. Say more. Yes. Being in nature, so many great things about being in nature. Listening to birdsong helps us regulate. I've been reading a book, The Hidden Life of Trees, which is really fascinating learning about trees. You have 10 to 12 black bears. We need to hear more, Scott. How do you tend to the black bears? Scott must live in a mountainous place. Scott might also live in Canada. I know there's some of you that live in Niagara. We have black bears here. Oh my gosh. That's amazing. Yes, we have bears that poop in our yard, but we don't go out whenever they're there because I'm afraid of them. Okay. And the other things that people do for rest. Okay. Any questions before I jump into some thinking traps? I'm trying to open up a presentation I made. Lake time, yes, looking at the water. I'm wondering if I can move my shared screen over to another presentation in the last 5 minutes so that you can see. Just a moment. I will try that. So thinking traps are loops that we get stuck in. Something happens, and then we start thinking a certain way. And then we start giving all these reasons, and then it takes us into a spiral where more thoughts create more thoughts. I'm going to do stop sharing, and then I'm going to share again. See what happens when I do this on the fly here. It might not work. I might just have to tell you without a visual for you so that we don't run out of time. Oh, bummer. Okay. One moment. All right. So I'll give you a couple of thinking traps. We have these core beliefs that create these automatic thoughts in our heads. And we can recognize when we get stuck in these automatic thoughts. So I'll tell you about 4 thinking traps in the next couple of minutes here. One is I should do something, and we start having all these rules about how we should behave, what we should be doing, or how others should behave. You've probably heard stop shoulding all over yourself. When you keep telling yourself that you should do something or you must do something, it threatens your competence, which is something we talked about earlier in motivation, how competence is so important. So if you start shoulding, that doesn't feel very good. Another is personalizing, and we actually kind of talked about this already with self-talk, saying everything, like I am a failure. You can say everything is my fault. You can say it's just the thing becomes a threat to you as a person instead of a thing that you did. Another I already talked about is catastrophizing, over-focusing and blowing negative events far out of proportion. And another one is overgeneralizing, so jumping to conclusions. And this is something I'm working on with my 3-year-old daughter, is she thinks something's going to happen and then she just starts screaming. How many times do we just think that because somebody looked at us a certain way, or because an email came across in a certain way, we think that we know what's going to happen, and then that changes the way that we show up in that next interaction. So those are some of there's many thinking traps. So if you want to know more, just Google it. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So ways that we can disrupt these thinking traps are some things that we already talked about: using credible self-talk, using your name, zooming out, zooming in. What would you say to a friend? There is something that is called the ATC model from cognitive behavioral therapy. So what that is, you can actually write it out. But number 1 is the A, adversity. So recognizing what is this thing that happened without any thoughts or judgment around it. Then write down the belief or the thought that you're having about that thing. So like I get an email from my boss or my leader, and it just I feel weird about it. It didn't really seem like I'm probably like I'm going to get fired or they're mad at me. That's the belief or the thought you have about that email, even though it's not actually a fact, but you start telling yourself that it's a fact. The consequence of thinking that way means that now you're stressed out. You're going to show up in all of your interactions. We talked about energy management earlier. You're going to show up a different way. You're not going to feel the way that you want to feel, or you're going to just start treating your boss differently, even though they didn't even mean for it to come that way. So what is a way to challenge that thought so that it might be more productive and generate perspective? What are different things that you can tell yourself? So that's an example of how you can generate perspective and dispute that thought. And that is also one key to resilience, which we didn't talk about today. And the way that we make sense of the things that are happening to us is called our explanatory style. So you can have an optimistic explanatory style or a pessimistic explanatory style. So being able to look at things that are not personal, that are not everything, that are not everywhere. Those are like the styles of negative thought patterns. How can you zoom out in a way that is temporary and that makes it not about you and that makes not everything in your life bad? Those are some ways to disrupt thinking traps. And I'm amazed that I was able to cover that in 3 minutes, and your brain probably hurts. But that was a little bit more about thinking traps. And I would definitely be stuck in a thinking trap if I came face to face with a mama bear. Any questions, guys? Any comments? Feel free to email me too if you're not comfortable in the chat putting stuff. But I love answering questions. I love connecting. This is my favorite thing to talk about. So give it a second to see if anyone has any more questions. Make sure you check out my video that I posted about Westlife soy milk. Thank you so much for that opportunity. And I had a lot of fun. The video is actually about vitality. So there you go. And I'm just really grateful for this opportunity to get to talk to all of you. And also thank you so much for making great products. These are things that I use. You're changing people's lives, their health, the environment, just so many different things that you're doing with all these plant-based products.
Sonya, thank you so much. This was super awesome. We really appreciate all the insights you shared with us and your stories. all very awesome. And thank you to those that joined the call today. There will be a recording available, and this will also be in the June Sun News.
Thanks so much, you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you.